Right now, as you're watching this, 3 separate volcanic systems on 3 separate continents are active at the same time. In Iceland, scientists say a new fissure eruption on the Reykjanes Peninsula is the most likely outcome in the coming weeks, with more magma stored beneath Svartsengi right now than at any point since this eruption sequence began in late 2023. In Indonesia, Mount Semeru and Mount Liwatobi Laki-Laki have been erupting almost daily, sending ash columns over a kilometer into the sky, while Mount Volcano has erupted close to 200 times since March. And in Italy, the ancient supervolcano beneath Naples, Campi Flegrei, just produced a shallow magnitude 4.4 earthquake that triggered a fresh seismic swarm in the Gulf of Pozzuoli, part of a slow-motion unrest crisis that has now logged tens of thousands of earthquakes since it began accelerating. This is not normal news cycle noise. Something is stirring across multiple volcanic systems simultaneously, and today we are going to break down exactly what is happening at each one, why they are behaving this way, and whether this represents anything genuinely unusual. No guessing, no dramatizing, just the facts, the science, and the real stakes. Drop a comment right now. Have you ever seen a volcano up close or felt the ground shake from one? Tell me where you were and what it was like. Thousands of you have shared stories about living near active volcanic zones, and I always love reading those. If you want to be the first to know every time something major happens with any of these 3 systems, subscribe to the channel right now. It is completely free. A thumbs up also helps enormously. Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one, so the algorithm actually shows it to people who need to see it. Thank you. Now, let us get into it. We start in Iceland, on the Reykjanes Peninsula, in the southwest corner of the country. This is one of the only places on Earth where the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, the underwater mountain range separating the North American and Eurasian tectonic plates, actually rises above the ocean surface. For roughly 800 years, this peninsula sat quiet. Then, in March of 2021, it woke up. Since that first eruption, there have been 12 separate eruptions on the peninsula, 9 of them along a specific fissure system called the Sundanukur Crater Row, located just north of the fishing town of Grindavik. The most recent of those eruptions ended in early August of last year. Since then, according to the Icelandic Meteorological Office, magma has been quietly accumulating beneath a region called Svartsengi. And as of this year, the volume stored underground has now exceeded the levels seen before every previous eruption in this series. Ground uplift is continuing at a measurable rate. Scientists describe the current pause as the longest gap in the entire Sundanukur sequence, which is precisely why they consider a new eruption the most likely scenario in the near term. Here is what makes Iceland's situation different from a typical natural disaster story. This is not a system building toward one catastrophic event. It is a system that erupts repeatedly in a controlled and closely monitored way, and has done so without killing anyone or seriously damaging Reykjavik, the international airport, or the country's main ring road. Every single eruption in this series has been what volcanologists call an effusive fissure eruption. Lava wells up slowly through a crack in the ground rather than exploding violently. There is no ash cloud on the scale of the 2010 Eyjafjallajökull eruption that grounded flights across Europe. The town of Grindavik itself has been evacuated and remains so, and the famous Blue Lagoon has closed and reopened multiple times depending on activity. But the broader country continues to function normally. Icelandic authorities have one of the most sophisticated volcano monitoring systems on the planet, tracking seismicity, ground deformation, and gas emissions around the clock. When magma begins moving underground, the warning window is typically 20 minutes to a few hours. That is not a lot of time, but it is enough to close roads, evacuate the immediate area, and keep people away from the fissure zone before lava breaks the surface. Volcanologists studying the region believe this eruptive phase could continue for years, possibly decades. Iceland is not becoming more dangerous. Iceland is simply doing more frequently what it has always been capable of doing. Now let us travel to Indonesia, where the situation looks louder, more frequent, and considerably more violent. Indonesia sits directly on the Pacific Ring of Fire and is home to more active volcanoes than almost any other country on Earth. This year alone, the country's volcanological agency has logged nearly 3,000 separate volcanic eruptions nationwide. Mount Semeru in East Java, one of the most consistently active volcanoes in the country, has erupted more than any other, sending white to gray ash plumes hundreds to thousands of meters above its summit almost daily, sometimes 5 separate eruptions in a single day. On the island of Flores, Mount Liwatobi Laki-Laki has been erupting continuously for months, registering hundreds of individual events this year alone, forcing authorities to maintain a 5-kilometer exclusion zone around the crater. And on the island of Halmahera, Mount Volcano, one of the most continuously active volcanoes in the world, erupting nearly non-stop since 1933, produced a major eruption in May that turned deadly. 20 hikers were on the slopes when the volcano erupted with unusual intensity. 3 did not survive. Local guides describe the mountain as unusually quiet in the days before, then erupting continuously rather than in the single sharp blast the area typically sees, catching experienced observers off guard. This is why Indonesia's volcanic activity carries a different kind of risk than Iceland's. These are not gentle, effusive fissures in uninhabited terrain. These are explosive stratovolcanoes, the classic cone-shaped mountains capable of producing pyroclastic flows, ash columns that disrupt regional air travel, and sudden, unpredictable intensification. Indonesia's geological agency operates a 4-tier alert system, and several of these volcanoes are currently sitting at level 3, described as standby. The second highest classification before an eruption is considered imminent or already underway. What makes this genuinely difficult for authorities is scale. Indonesia has more than 100 active volcanoes spread across an archipelago of thousands of islands, and monitoring all of them with the same intensity Iceland applies to a single peninsula is simply not realistic. When a mountain like Volcano, already erupting hundreds of times a year, suddenly shifts into a longer and more intense phase, the shift can happen faster than evacuation orders can spread, especially to hikers and tour groups already on the slopes. And now to Italy, and the story that genuinely unsettles volcanologists the most. Just west of Naples lies a vast volcanic caldera called Campi Flegrei, the Flegreian Fields. Unlike Iceland's fissures or Indonesia's cone-shaped stratovolcanoes, Campi Flegrei is a supervolcano, a 12-kilometer wide collapsed crater formed by 2 of the most violent eruptions in the geological record, one around 39,000 years ago, one around 15,000 years ago. Its most recent eruption, a comparatively minor event that formed a hill called Monte Nuovo, happened in 1538. For centuries since, the caldera has done something almost no other populated volcanic region on Earth does. It breathes. Scientists call it bradyseism, a slow cyclical rise and fall of the ground itself, driven by pressure changes in the hydrothermal and magmatic systems below. You can see the physical proof of it standing in the Roman ruins at Pozzuoli, where ancient marble columns bear the distinct boring marks of marine mollusks roughly 2 meters up their shafts, permanent evidence that this ground was once underwater and later rose back above the sea. The current uplift phase began in 2005 and has never stopped. Since 2018, both the pace of uplift and the frequency of earthquakes have been climbing. By this year, cumulative ground uplift at the monitoring station in Rione Terra, the historic quarter of Pozzuoli, had reached over 160 centimeters. In one single week this past February, monitoring stations recorded around 70 earthquakes. In May, a shallow magnitude 4.4 earthquake struck offshore in the Gulf of Pozzuoli, triggering a fresh seismic swarm, following an earlier magnitude 4.6 event last year that the director of Italy's National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology described as among the strongest ever recorded there. Scientists have used machine learning models to reprocess the seismic data and found something striking. Nearly 50,000 individual earthquakes recorded in the caldera since 2022 alone, far more than older monitoring networks were able to detect. Researchers studying the fault system say they have found no direct evidence of magma actively rising toward the surface. But they have also stated plainly that the acceleration in seismicity and deformation is unlike anything the modern instrumental record has captured. And one recent projection estimated the system could reach what researchers call a critical mechanical threshold sometime between 2030 and 2034. Here is why Campi Flegrei is genuinely different from the other two. More than 500,000 people live directly inside the caldera. Several 100,000 more live in the immediate surrounding area of Naples, one of the most densely populated volcanic regions on the planet. During the last major crisis in the early 1980s, ground uplift and over 16,000 earthquakes forced the permanent relocation of tens of thousands of residents from Pozzuoli's historic center, a district that in places remains empty to this day. Current buildings in the zone are lower and better reinforced than they were in the 1980s, and Italy's National Civil Protection Service has a formal evacuation plan that would relocate residents from the highest risk zone within 72 hours if the alert level rises to alarm. But officials are also candid about the uncertainty. Nobody, including the scientists monitoring it around the clock, can say with confidence whether this unrest phase is building toward a small eruption, a large one, or eventually subsiding the way the 1980s crisis did without ever erupting at all. So here is the honest question. Are 3 volcanic systems on 3 continents becoming active at the same time evidence that the planet itself is entering a more dangerous phase? The scientific answer is no, and understanding why matters. Earth has somewhere between 40 and 50 volcanoes erupting at any given moment, most of them far from populated areas and never making international news. Indonesia alone logs thousands of individual eruptive events in an average year, simply because it sits atop one of the most volcanically dense stretches of the Ring of Fire on the planet. Iceland's current eruptive phase has been openly discussed by volcanologists as a decades-long cycle since it began in 2021, entirely unconnected to anything happening in the Pacific. And Campi Flegrei's unrest has been building gradually since 2005, driven by its own local hydrothermal system, with no geological link whatsoever to tectonic activity in Iceland or Indonesia. These three systems sit on entirely different plate boundaries, thousands of kilometers apart, and do not communicate with each other in any physical sense. What has changed is not the underlying geology of the planet. What has changed is how closely we are now watching it, and how many people now live close enough to these systems for every eruption, swarm, and uplift measurement to become a headline the moment it happens. That said, dismissing this as pure coincidence would also be misleading, because there is one thing genuinely worth paying attention to, and it is not about the volcanoes. It is about exposure. Millions more people live near active volcanic zones today than at any point in human history, because global urban populations have exploded over the last 70 years, and much of that growth concentrated in places that happen to sit near tectonic boundaries. Naples, Jakarta, Reykjavik. These are not remote outposts anymore. They are major population centers built in the shadow of systems that were shaping this landscape millions of years before anyone lived there. The question volcanologists actually lose sleep over is not whether these systems will remain active. They will. The question is whether monitoring, evacuation planning, and public understanding keep pace with how many people are now in the path of them. Let us be direct about the practical message here, because information without action is just anxiety. If you live in or are traveling to Iceland, the current guidance is genuinely reassuring. Flights, tours, and daily life have continued through 12 straight eruptions since 2021, and authorities close only the specific zones that need to be closed. If you are near Campi Flegrei or planning to visit, check the official yellow alert status before travel. Know that the intervention zone around Pozzuoli has a defined 72-hour evacuation plan, and understand that a felt earthquake there, while unsettling, is not the same as an eruption warning. If you live near or are hiking any active Indonesian volcano, the single most important rule is the one that was violated in Halmahera this May. Respect the exclusion zone, because these systems can shift from a quiet period to a sustained, intense eruption faster than a rumor can spread through a tour group. None of this requires panic. It requires the same thing Japan's earthquake preparedness required: sustained respect for a well-monitored, well-understood natural system, and a willingness to follow the guidance of the scientists tracking it every single day. Final thought. Volcanoes have been erupting on this planet for over 4 billion years, long before continents took their current shape, long before anything resembling a city existed anywhere near a caldera or a fissure zone. Iceland's eruptions will likely continue for decades, exactly as they have for the last 4 years, mostly harmless to human life, because of where they occur and how closely they are watched. Indonesia's volcanoes will keep erupting because that is simply what living on the ring of fire means. The real work is making sure exclusion zones are respected and monitoring keeps improving. Campi Flegrei remains the genuine open question, a supervolcano slowly waking up beneath one of Europe's most densely populated regions, watched more closely today than at any point in its history, with scientists honest enough to admit they do not yet know exactly where this unrest is heading. What we do know, from Iceland's calm eruptions to Italy's careful evacuation planning, is that preparation and monitoring change outcomes. They do not stop a volcano from erupting. They determine how many people are standing too close when it does. We will keep tracking all three of these systems as they develop. Every new magma measurement from Svartsengi, every fresh eruption report from Semeru and Lewatobi, every earthquake swarm beneath Pozzuoli. Subscribe so you do not miss updates on any of it. And leave that comment below. Have you ever lived near or visited an active volcano? Tell me what it was like. Because these are not just geological events. They are places where people build lives in the shadow of forces older than civilization itself. Understanding that is how we stay motivated to take this seriously. 5,000 likes on this video. Let us go. See you in the next one.